Now let us look at the second important life processes, that is a respiration. So we discussed about the first life process, that is nutrition. It is a life process by which the needed materials are supplied to the organisms. Why the materials are needed? The materials are needed to get energy to carry out their activities, to survive and to maintain their bodies. So the supply of materials is required and materials are supplied to the cells. Now what do the cells do with materials? The cells, they need energy, but the materials are supplied. Carbohydrates are supplied to the cells, proteins are supplied to the cells, amino acids and fatty acids are supplied to the cells. So what do the cells do with these materials? Actually, they need energy. Of course, they need some materials. Along with the material, they need energy. The energy is in the form of these materials, chemical energy. Energy is packed in the materials. Energy is packed in the glucose. Energy is packed in the amino acid. Energy is packed in the fatty acid. So how the energy comes out of these materials? So here, in the process of nutrition, the materials are supplied which have energy. Energy is there. So from the materials or from the molecules, energy has to come out. And this is achieved by the another life process, that is respiration. So respiration is a process in which energy is liberated out from the nutrients, from the molecules like glucose, amino acids and fatty acids. So these are the molecules, the primary molecules from which energy is derived. Most primarily glucose. Glucose is a major source of energy. Of course, at times amino acids, at times fatty acids also liberate energy. They liberate the energy by a process called as respiration. So respiration is a very complex process. It involves different processes. See, nutrition also, nutrition in the sense supplying the materials to the body, but this is done in different ways. So the organism, it has to obtain its food. So that is also a part of nutrition. How an organism is eating its food is also a part of nutrition. After eating, the food is converted to simple form, that is digestion. That is also part of nutrition. After digestion, the digested material has to be absorbed. Utilization of nutrients, that is also a part of nutrition. So nutrition involves so many stages. In the same way, respiration also involves so many stages. In general terms, in general notation, if someone says respiration, so most of the people compare the respiration with breathing. So can you, if you are asked to tell whether an organism is respiring or not, you will observe its movements. Its ribs are moving. So air is passed in and passed out. You can say that yes, respiration is going on. Simply you can say that breathing is going on. But breathing is only not the respiration. Breathing is not the complete respiration. So breathing is a part of respiration. Breathing, what happens? We take the air in and we leave the air in. That means for the process of release of energy from the molecules, air is required. So which part of air is required? Oxygen is required. So we are taking the air in which contains the oxygen that is supplied to the cells for the breakdown of these molecules, glucose to energy. So glucose to energy. What is this process? Respiration. This is also respiration. But it happens inside the cell, it is cellular respiration. So here what is needed? Oxygen is required. From where does this oxygen comes? Oxygen is supplied by the process of breathing. We take the oxygen from the surroundings by the process of breathing. And in this process, when the energy is released from the molecules, along with the energy, what is released? Carbon dioxide is released. So this carbon dioxide, it has to be sent out of our body. So carbon dioxide, it has to be sent into the atmosphere. Whereas from atmosphere, oxygen has to be taken in to our cells. So some gases are required by the cells. Some gas has to be sent out of this cell. So this is achieved by breathing. So when respiration is going on, which gas is released? carbon dioxide is released. So we can prove this, the carbon dioxide is released during respiration. We can prove it with the help of an activity. Let us see. Now, let us see an activity by which we can prove that carbon dioxide is released during respiration, or we can prove that the gas that is present in the air which we leave out or which we exhale is carbon dioxide. Means whatever the air we are exhaling out, it contains carbon dioxide. From where it is coming? It is coming from the process of respiration. It is generated in the process of respiration. So this can be proved with the help of an experiment here. So here for this activity you need 2 test tubes with freshly prepared lime water. So don't misunderstand, this is a lemon water. Lime water made up of calcium oxide mixed with water. So that is the lime water. So when the lime water reacts with carbon dioxide, it forms calcium carbonate. So you have taken freshly prepared lime water. You know how to make lime water. You have learnt in your chemistry lessons. So in first test tube, say it is A, here you kept a straw, and with the help of the straw, you started blowing out air. So from where does the air comes? From your lungs. That means the air which is being expelled, exhaled. The exhaling air is blown into this freshly prepared lime water. Slowly what happens? The lime water turns milky. Milky. That means lime water reacted with carbon dioxide and calcium carbonate is formed, CaCO3. So calcium hydroxide to calcium carbonate is turned. Now let us look at the second one. Second test tube, label it as B, and in this test tube also you have taken freshly prepared lime water, but here instead of blowing air, you are using a pichkari, a syringe or pichkari or something which you have to blow the air. So such kind of syringe you have taken and you are blowing the air, you are pumping the air into this water. Just you are pumping the air which is present in the atmosphere. So now let us see the difference. Here also the water may turn milky, but it is very slow and very delayed. It takes very long time. Here it becomes quickly. Here slowly, because the percentage of carbon dioxide present in the air is very less in the outside air, but the percentage of carbon dioxide present in the exhaled air is more. So here it happens quickly. So what does this experiment shows? That the air that is exhaled during breathing, it contains carbon dioxide, and also it tells us that this carbon dioxide is generated in our body in a process called as respiration. Now let us look at one more activity. Respiration not only takes in human beings or in higher animals, even in the simpler organisms also respiration takes place. Even in their respiration also carbon dioxide is released. Say for example, if we take the example yeast, of course the way the reproduction takes place inside the cells may be different between yeast and human beings. But finally here energy is released in the respiration, that is common. Energy is released. Along with energy, carbon dioxide is released. This is also common in any kind of respiration. Carbon dioxide is also released. So here let us take the example yeast. Let us see whether the carbon dioxide is released or not in case of yeast during respiration. So what we are doing here, we are taking a small container or a test tube with some fruit juice. Fruit juice or sugar solution. So see that the fruit juice or sugar solution are not too cold. They are having a little bit of temperature, means that they are lukewarm. That means the activity of these organisms and the respiration is optimum at this temperature. So in this add some yeast. Yeast. Where do you get that yeast? We can get it from a bakery. In bakery, the bakers use the yeast to raise the dough to make the cakes and bread. So you can find the yeast in bakery. A baker's yeast, you can put some yeast and keep it closed. Now fit a cork which has got one hole through this, and through this hole put a pipe into this solution. So you have taken a glass pipe which can be bent by heating. So with the help of that glass pipe, you have bent the pipe in this shape. So it has got two bends here. The one end of the tube is entering into this test tube which is containing the fruit juice with yeast. So here you closed it with a rubber cork. So by that there is no chance of the gas which is formed here, it cannot escape. So there is no chance because it is closed. So this gas, it has to be passed only through this tube. So whatever the gas is released here, this gas, it has to pass through this tube in this way, and you arranged the tube to enter into another test tube which is having freshly prepared lime water. You know that if the gas released here is carbon dioxide, whenever it reacts with this lime water, it makes the lime water milky. So what do you think? What happens here? Even the yeast are the organisms that they carry out respiration when food is available here. That means the fruit juice is the food, it contains the sugars on which the yeast feeds. So the yeast convert the sugars to alcohols, and in this process energy is derived, energy is liberated. Along with energy, what is released in respiration? Carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide gas is released which is captured into this tube, and it passes to the other end of the tube and finally enters into the lime water, where it reacts with lime water to form calcium carbonate, which makes it to turn milky. So this experiment proves that carbon dioxide is released in respiration, and this experiment proves that even in case of respiration of yeast also carbon dioxide is released. So by these experiments we can understand that in the process of respiration carbon dioxide is released. Now let us see what exactly happens in this respiration, cellular respiration. That means the respiration which is taking place inside the cell. The first phase is transport or supply of gases. Oxygen is supplied, that is by breathing. Inhalation, exhalation. So in this process, the lungs and other parts of our respiratory system help. That is to get the oxygen. Once the oxygen is taken by the lungs have blood vessels which supply this oxygen to the cells. Now inside the cells, this oxygen is used to derive energy out of the nutrients, out of these molecules. So how this process takes place? Is it a single step reaction, releasing energy from the foodstuffs using oxygen? Do you think it is a single step reaction? Definitely not. So it is not a single step reaction. It is a series of reactions. It is a chain of reactions in which slowly, step by step, energy is released from the nutrients. So along with the energy, some carbon dioxide may be released, some carbon dioxide is released, and some toxins or waste materials are also produced in this process. Now let us see the different stages of this cellular respiration. Now let us see how the energy is liberated or released from glucose. So that is the different stages of cellular respiration. So basically the glucose is supplied to the cells. In the cell, in the cytoplasm, that is the location at which the primary part of this reaction takes place. So in the cytoplasm of this cell, the glucose is converted to pyruvate or pyruvic acid. So glucose is a 6-carbon compound which is converted to 2-pyruvate of 3 carbon each. A 6-carbon compound of glucose is converted to 2-pyruvic acid or 2-pyruvate of 3 carbon each. So this is called as glycolysis. So glycolysis means breakdown of glucose into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid which takes place in the cytoplasm. So this is common for any kind of respiration, even in the aerobic organisms or anaerobic organisms. That means some organisms, they carry out respiration without the presence of oxygen. Those are anaerobic organisms like bacteria, yeast. And other organisms, they carry out respiration in presence of oxygen like human beings. We carry out the respiration in our cells. The cellular respiration is carried out in presence of oxygen. So we are aerobic organisms. But whereas bacteria and yeast, they carry out the cellular respiration in absence of oxygen. Those are anaerobic organisms. So whether it is anaerobic respiration or aerobic respiration, the first part of the respiration, conversion of glucose to pyruvate, is carried out in the cytoplasm of the cell and in absence of oxygen. Oxygen is not required for this step. Both for aerobic organisms as well as anaerobic organisms, this conversion is common. What is that? Glucose is converted to pyruvate. One molecule of 6-carbon glucose is converted to 2 molecules of 3-carbon pyruvic acid. Now let us see what happens to this pyruvate in case of yeast, in case of aerobic organisms. In case of aerobic organisms like human beings, this pyruvic acid is converted to carbon dioxide, water and energy. So the molecule is completely utilized, and from that simple substances like carbon dioxide and water are released, and the total energy present in the pyruvate is utilized, released out, taken out. In which form? The energy will be released in the form of a molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So in this process, in aerobic respiration, that is in presence of oxygen, the pyruvic acid is completely released from energy. So the energy is completely taken out of this pyruvic acid and it is converted to carbon dioxide, water, and so the energy is derived out of this. So there are no big byproducts, there are no big biomolecules as products in this reaction. Only the simple substances like carbon dioxide and water are released out of it. So in case of absence of oxygen like bacteria or yeast, if we take yeast, in case of yeast, what happens to this pyruvic acid? If the organism want to get complete energy from the pyruvate, whatever the energy is stored in the pyruvate, how many ATP are there in that pyruvate, if the organism wanted to take the whole energy, it needs oxygen. But here in case of yeast, no oxygen, absence of oxygen. In these cases, what happens? The respiration continues, which is called as fermentation. Here we are calling this process as fermentation, which happens in absence of oxygen. What happens is that ethanol and carbon dioxide are released. So pyruvic acid is converted to ethanol and carbon dioxide and energy, but the energy is less compared to aerobic respiration. In case of aerobic respiration, the energy present in the pyruvate is completely taken out, but whereas completely released here, but it is not completely released, only a part of the energy is released and some energy is still stored in the ethanol, but the organism completely it cannot completely utilize the pyruvate. So in anaerobic respiration, these organisms get less energy out of the glucose when compared to aerobic organisms. In anaerobic organisms, along with the energy, some other material is also prepared, synthesized. So these are the differences between anaerobic respiration and aerobic respiration. So the organisms which can breathe and take oxygen in their bodies, aerobic respiration takes place. In our bodies also aerobic respiration takes place. But sometimes, in some cases, even in our bodies, on a temporary basis, anaerobic respiration takes place in certain situations. See, you are holding your breath while doing some exercise or jogging or running. So by holding your breath, you are running. So you are not breathing, you are not supplying oxygen to your body and you are running. In such cases, there is no oxygen to the cells, you are not breathing. You held up your breath for some time. So the cells are deprived of oxygen. What do? So there the energy is required. As you are running means lot of energy is required. So the glucose is converted to pyruvic acid. The first step doesn't require oxygen anyway. So the glucose is converted to pyruvic acid. That's fine. But the pyruvic acid has to give out energy, but there is no supply of oxygen in your muscles. In such cases, so the pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid and energy. The pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid and energy. Here also, the energy is not completely derived from the glucose because oxygen is not there. Only some energy. So you may get some energy from the glucose, not as you get in the aerobic respiration. If the oxygen is present, you will get that complete energy from the glucose. Oxygen is absent, you will get lactic acid and energy. So this lactic acid gets accumulated in your muscles. So as you are running up in your muscles, this anaerobic respiration takes place when you hold your breath. When you stop the supply of oxygen temporarily, then lactic acid builds up in your muscles and it may lead to muscle cramps. Suddenly, if you are doing a vigorous exercise, giving some heavy work to your muscles, if that oxygen is not sufficient, it may lead to muscle cramps. You may feel that pain in your muscles because due to the accumulation of lactic acid. But this is a temporary one. Soon you release your breath, soon you take the oxygen, slowly this lactic acid is again converted to pyruvic acid and it goes on as usual in the reactions. So this is the way how the glucose is converted to energy in different situations and in different cases like anaerobic respiration and aerobic respiration. So whatever may be the respiration, finally what is the needed thing here? Energy. In anaerobic respiration, less energy plus some other product like ethanol. In aerobic respiration, energy is released in large quantity. Along with that, some carbon dioxide and water are released. Here all the cases we see that the energy is released. In which form the energy is released here? In which forms the cells can readily use the energy? That is the ATP. So in this respiration, energy is finally released in the form of ATP. So ATP are called as cell currency. That means for various activities of this cell, ATP are required. Of course, you may be, say just for an example, you may be holding a check which is worth of some 10,000 or 20,000. You may be holding a gold bar which is of worth 50,000 or 1 lakh. But you cannot use that gold bar or check to buy some provisions in a shop. You need to carry some cash with you. So in the same way, here the energy is packed in this glucose and pyruvate. Finally, for the cells, the energy is required in the form of ATP. So ATP is called as cell currency because for all activities of this cell, ATP are required. So energy is finally released in the form of ATP. So we have seen how the energy is released from the molecules like glucose in the process of cellular respiration. So energy is released in the form of a molecule called as ATP. So what is this ATP? Adenosine triphosphate. So its name itself indicates that there are 3 phosphates in this adenosine. Say this is adenosine. So it has got 3 phosphates. Some 3 phosphates here. So adenosine triphosphate. So this is the molecule which has got the energy packed in it. In endothermic reactions, that means the reactions which absorb the heat, which absorb the energy are called endothermic reactions. So in endothermic reactions, the energy is absorbed by splitting this ATP into ADP, adenosine diphosphate plus inorganic phosphate. So ATP is broken down to ADP and inorganic phosphate. So when this breaking takes place, energy is liberated and used by that reaction. So in this way, the ATP, the energy currency molecules of ATP are utilized inside the cells. When the terminal phosphate of an adenosine triphosphate is split by water molecule, we get 30.5 kilojoules per mole of energy. So this much of energy is released. This ADP, again they get the another phosphate bond and they become ATP. So this takes place during the cellular respiration. Again these ADP are converted to ATP. So ATP is an energy packed molecule. Once the energy is taken out, it becomes adenosine diphosphate. So it is stored in that last terminal phosphate, third phosphate of this ATP. So this is how energy is supplied. This energy is used for various chemical reactions, just simply like how a battery or a cell is used to run different kind of things. The chemical energy in the battery is used as a light energy, sound energy, mechanical energy. So we can use it in different forms. In the same way, the energy present in the ATP is utilized for various reactions inside the cells. So we have seen that respiration, the cellular respiration, in which energy is released from the molecules like glucose. But here, if you see the aerobic respiration, so the aerobic respiration requires oxygen, takes place only in presence of oxygen. How the aerobic organisms get the oxygen? Where is it present? Oxygen is present in the air as well as in the water. The organisms that live on land, they get the oxygen from the air. Air is around us. Air contains oxygen. So how do organisms obtain this oxygen? If you see plants, they have special pores called as stomata through which the oxygen can be taken in. Of course, the plant produces oxygen and releases out, but sometimes when the photosynthesis is not done, the plant may take oxygen from outside even. That happens through the stomata. In this way, the oxygen is supplied to the bodies of plants. Whereas if you see the microorganisms, unicellular organisms, how do they get? They get the oxygen by simple diffusion. Their bodies are very simple and the oxygen present in the atmosphere can easily diffuse into their bodies. But if you see the multicellular organisms, they have well-developed structures to absorb the oxygen from the air. We see a gradual development of respiratory structures from different organisms, from smaller organisms to higher organisms. If you see in that insects, they have some air spaces in their bodies, air tubes, through which they respire, tracheal respiration. So whereas if you see the frogs and all, they absorb the oxygen through their moist skin, and even they have lung-like structures to breathe in. And if you see that the other animals like lizards or snakes, reptiles, they have respiratory structures, lungs, so they breathe through that. If you see the higher animals, cats, dogs, humans, they have well-developed lungs to absorb the oxygen from the air. If you see the animals that are living in water, aquatic organisms, they have to absorb the oxygen from the water. The availability of the oxygen is different in different types of water bodies. It depends upon the purity of the water. Polluted water bodies contain very less amount of oxygen. So the percentage of oxygen is not stable in water. It is a problem to the aquatic organisms. So aquatic organisms like fishes, they will take the water into their mouth, and from the mouth it is pushed into their phoral cavity or buccal cavity. From there it is pushed into the pharynx where the gills are arranged. So this water is pushed on to the gills and the gills are made wet. So the gills, they have blood vessels. When this water comes in contact with the blood vessels, the oxygen is diffused into their blood. So from there it is carried to the body. So this is a bit quite complex process that is observed in the fishes, and I already told you that the percentage of oxygen is different in different water bodies. If the percentage of oxygen is less, the fish has to drink the water, take the water into its mouth continuously and push the water onto its gills, so by that the gills are bathed with water. From there the oxygen is absorbed by diffusion and the remaining water is pushed out through the gill lids, that is called as operculum. See, if you see a fish from its top position, top view, we see like this. So the water enters into the mouth of the fish. The fish, it has got the gills here. So whatever the water is taken into its mouth, the fish opens its mouth and takes the water. Then it raises its lower cavity of the mouth. It raises its lower floor of the mouth. So by that, the pressure pushes the water onto the gills and the water comes out. As the water is passing over the gills, from the gills, whatever the blood vessels are present in the gills absorb the oxygen from this water, and this oxygen is supplied to the body parts. This is in case of fish. Different aquatic organisms have different arrangements to absorb the oxygen from the water. Terrestrial animals, they have plenty of oxygen, 21% of oxygen in the atmosphere, and they have developed special structures to absorb the oxygen. Even in the terrestrial organisms like human beings, we have to take the air in to special structure where the absorption, diffusion of oxygen takes place. We need lot of oxygen. So definitely we need lot of surface for the process of diffusion. See, we cannot take the oxygen through our skin. Our skin has large surface, it is exposed to the air. But from the air, our skin cannot take any oxygen. The air has to go into some structure in which the diffusion of gases takes place. So this structure is well protected inside the body, that is the lungs. If we observe the human respiratory system, so it has got different parts. Let us see how the oxygen is diffused here and how the oxygen enters. The oxygen mixed with up air, that means the air which contains oxygen, oxygenated air, it enters our body through the nostrils. We have a pair of nostrils. The air passes through these nostrils. Inside the nostril we have some hairs to filter the dust and insects. There we have some mucus which absorb the dust and which moist the air before enters into the lungs, so by that the lungs are not collapsed. So the air enters into this nasal cavity which is lined with mucus. The air is humidified here. The humidified air is passed through this special structure called as windpipe. This is the windpipe or trachea. We have a windpipe. The windpipe begins with a special structure called as larynx, voice box, that means which enable us to produce the sounds while exhalation of the air. So the air passes through this windpipe and it divides into two branches called as bronchi. So these bronchi are divided into some other branches, finer branches, bronchioles, and finally they end up with small bubble-like structures, tiny grape-sized bubble-like structures. These are alveoli. So alveoli are the units of lungs. The structural and functional unit of lung is alveoli. Every alveoli, if this is the alveoli, every alveoli is richly supplied with blood vessels. Blood vessels are there in this alveoli. When we inhale the air which contains oxygen, when the air enters into this alveoli, so here in the alveoli, the diffusion of gases takes place between the blood and alveoli. So the alveoli are like small bubbles folded because large amount of area is kept in small place. So more surface in less space. So as the surface is more, there is a chance for more diffusion of gas. So more amount of gas, oxygen is diffused into the blood. So this oxygen is carried to different body parts. So humans have this kind of well developed structures for the diffusion of oxygen, that is for the collection of oxygen as well as for the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So let us see the next important life process in this chapter, life processes, that is transportation. So already we discussed about the importance of transportation because we have seen that for every organism, for its survival, the maintenance of its body is required. That means the organism must acquire some materials from outside, that is food. That happens by the life process nutrition. So whatever the materials acquired by this organism, say this is an organism, it acquired food. So this is the organism, it acquires food materials from the environment, that is either from plant or animal matter, plants or animals. So the organisms, they obtain the food. And the organisms, they also obtain oxygen. We have seen that in respiration, oxygen from the environment. Of course, the plants, they add oxygen to the environment. So food and oxygen. If the organism is a single cell, everything happens within the cell. There is no need of transportation of materials. But you see the organisms like human beings, we are a multicellular organism. We have millions and millions, trillions of cells in our body. The source of intake is different from the point of utilization. For example, we are eating the food, it is going to the digestive system. It doesn't mean that only digestive system need food. Food is required by each and every cell. Even the tip of your finger also needs food materials for energy. But the food is going to the digestive system. How the food can reach from digestive system to this point? Who is carrying? So there we need a system for the transportation. That is transport system. Transport system is required in multicellular organisms to transport the food material. Not only the food material, the other component important for the production of energy. Food and oxygen are required for the production of energy. So the second one, oxygen is also transported, supplied to each and every cell of our body from the point of collection. Where the oxygen is collected? In our lungs. We are breathing the air, it's going into the lungs, and inside the lungs, bronchi, bronchioles, alveoli, at the point of alveoli, oxygen is collected. So the collected oxygen has to be supplied to each and every cell. That is from the respiratory system to each and every part of our body. So that supply is done by the transport system. So the transport system majorly, it takes the role of distributing food material, oxygen to each and every cell. So distribution of food and oxygen. The second thing, once the food and oxygen are supplied to each and every cell, cellular respiration takes place and waste materials are produced. Carbon dioxide is produced, urea is produced. These wastes should not stay back in the blood or body. They are dangerous to our body. So they are to be eliminated from the body. These waste, what is that? Carbon dioxide plus urea. These are produced in our body. How they are eliminated? They are to be taken to the excretory system for filtration. Urea is filtered in the excretory system. Carbon dioxide has to be taken to the lungs for the exhalation, leaving out. So who does this work? This is done by the transport system. So the transport system, it carries these waste materials to send them out, to eliminate the waste out of the body. So these two are the major functions of the transport system. One is distribution of oxygen and food to each and every cell. Second thing is wastes like carbon dioxide and urea. They are taken to the respective systems to send out of the body. Otherwise, the materials are accumulated wherever they are and there is no life process or activity. So, the distribution of materials takes place by the transport system. Now, let us see what are the various parts of the transport system in human beings and how this works out. Let us see. The first part of the transport system we discuss here is the blood. Blood is a liquid connective tissue. In 9th class you studied about tissues, in that you learned blood is a tissue. Of course it is a liquid even though it is a connective tissue because it connects various parts of our body. So blood, it carries the materials. What we have discussed here, distribution of food and oxygen and distribution of removal of carbon dioxide and urea. Blood dissolves these substances. Blood consists of some components which can carry these materials. Food materials like glucose, amino acids, they can directly dissolve in the blood. Oxygen is carried by a special component of the blood called as hemoglobin. Blood consists of hemoglobin which carry the oxygen. Hemoglobin binds the oxygen and carries it to the cell. In the same way, blood can dissolve urea, blood can dissolve carbon dioxide. So blood has the properties of carrying these materials. So blood is carrying. Blood is the fluid connective tissue. It consists of cells. Blood, it consists of cells and plasma. So plasma is the liquid part of the blood which dissolves these substances like glucose, urea, whatever they are dissolved here. Blood also consists of cells. Again they are WBC, white blood cells and red blood cells. Here the cells are of two types, WBC and RBC, white blood cells and red blood cells. So here these red blood cells, they also take part in the transport. Red blood cells consist of the hemoglobin. So this hemoglobin carry the oxygen. So it has that oxygen binding affinity. So in this way, the components of the blood, they take part in the transport of materials. So plasma dissolves glucose, urea, carbon dioxide, these kind of materials. But how the blood is circulated? Blood is a liquid, fluid connective tissue. But how the blood is circulated? If you see the lower organisms, in some of the organisms, they don't have any special tubes to circulate the blood. But here, In human beings, we have some specific tubes to circulate the blood. In lower organisms, in lower forms, the fluid is simply passed into their body cavities. But here it is not like. In our case, the blood is circulated in specially designed pipes which are connected to each and every part of your body. So we have some piping. How the water is supplied to your house from the municipal water works. From the municipal water works, the purified water is supplied to your houses through the pipelines. So how the water is channelized? The water enters into each and every street, each and every house. In the same way, the blood enters each and every part of your body. It enters into each and every tissue. So thereby the blood is supplied. So in that way, we have some network of pipes. Right, we have network of pipes. But how the blood is circulated? See here, certain parts are going down your legs. So because of gravity, the blood may fall down. And some parts are at higher position, head. So the blood has to move against the gravity, against the earth. So how this is possible? How it is circulating? Let us see, in your house, if you want some water in some second floor or third floor, from the house bottom sump, you put on the motor. So the water will be drawn from the house where the water is stored underground. From there the water is carried to second floor, first floor, second floor, third floor. In the same way, how a motor can pump the water, in the same way we have a pump in our body which circulate this blood in the special tubes called as blood vessels. So we have the special tubes called as blood vessels that are compared with special tubes, a network of tubes, and we have heart. This is our pump which pumps the blood to different parts of the body. So in this way the blood is circulated throughout our body to achieve the main important task, distribution of food and oxygen, and that is to collect the wastes like carbon dioxide and urea from each and every cell and carry them to the respective systems to eliminate out of the body. So now let us see the construction and functioning of our heart. So we compared this organ with a pump because as we discussed that the transportation of materials has to be done in our body, that is to provide nutrients as well as oxygen, at the same time removal of waste from the body. So to do the task, the blood has to be circulated. So there are some special tubes called as blood vessels in our body through which the blood can flow, but its flow is maintained. The blood is pumped by a pump called as heart. So this is a muscular organ which is located in our rib cage, that is located in this chest area, that is at the center point slightly towards the left of our thoracic cavity. So it is both sides, it is enclosed by lungs. So in between the lungs the heart is arranged. It is a muscular organ. So the heart, if you see the internal section of the heart, and let us see how the blood flows in the heart. The heart is mainly divided into 4 chambers, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 chambers or rooms. So here in the heart, the construction is like that it prevents the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. So there are 2 kinds of blood flows in our body. One is blood rich in oxygen, the blood without oxygen. So let us see the 4 chambers. The top chambers, these top chambers are called as atria. Atria. This is the left atria, this is right atria. I have written LARA. And the 2 bottom chambers are called as ventricles. Ventricles. If you see that there, the atria are a bit smaller and they have thin walls compared to ventricles. Ventricles, they have thick wall. We'll see the reason why they are like that. And we can see that the major blood vessels are connected to this chamber. Here you can see this is the major blood vessel called as aorta. Aorta, main aorta. Systemic aorta. This aorta, it takes the oxygenated blood to different parts of the body. And you can see this vena cava, upper. This one is called as vena cava upper. Upper means from the top parts of the body, from the head and all. And this is vena cava lower. Vena cava lower. And you can see a wall dividing these ventricles. Between the two ventricles there is a wall called as septum. And we can observe one more thing in the structure. Between two chambers there are some door-like kind of things here. You can see here, 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 1, 2. So these door-like structures are called as valves. These valves, they prevent the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. They allow the blood to flow only in one direction. That means blood flow from aorta to this ventricle, not ventricle to aorta. See, this is the left ventricle. Blood always flow from left auricle to left ventricle, not left ventricle to left auricle. Blood cannot flow from left ventricle to left auricle. It is not possible, because if even though the heart contracts, these valves, they close and they prevent the entry of blood back. So the blood is allowed to flow in only one direction. That is because of valves. Now let us see how the blood enters into the heart. Oxygenated blood, the blood which is rich in oxygen, where is it? Where the blood gets oxygen? In the lungs. So when you are breathing, taking the air in, so the oxygen present in the air is absorbed by your lungs. This absorbed oxygen is added to the blood. Now the blood is rich in oxygen. It carries the oxygen to where? It has to supply it all body parts. But how can it supply? It needs some force, some pressure to be supplied to each and every part. So it goes to the heart. So from the lungs, the blood enters into the left auricle. First, the lungs are connected to the left auricle. So the blood, it flows into the left auricle. The heart, it contracts and relaxes to pump the blood. It is not still. The heart is beating. We can feel heartbeat. By placing your hand on your chest, you can see that there you can find some sound, because the heart is beating, continuously pumping the blood. So the heart is contracting and relaxing. The heart is not completely contracting as a whole and not completely relaxing as a whole. The auricles or the atria of the heart contracts first, then the contraction goes to ventricles, then the auricles relax. So in this way, like a wave-like contraction and relaxation makes the heart to pump the blood. So when the oxygenated blood enters the atria it contracts and it pushes the blood down to the left ventricle. So oxygenated blood from left auricle, it passes to left ventricle. Now the left ventricle contracts. Of course, the ventricles contract, both the ventricles contract. When the ventricles are contracted, these valves will close. The blood from the left ventricle, which blood? Oxygenated blood, it enters into this systemic aorta. This is the main aorta or systemic aorta, which carry the oxygenated blood. So this systemic aorta, it carries the oxygenated blood to each and every part of the body. So from here, the blood is supplied to different parts of the body. Which blood? Oxygenated blood. See, at the same time, how it happened in the left auricle and left ventricle. In the right side, what's happening, you see now. In the right side, into the right auricle, the deoxygenated blood is collected from body parts. The body parts, they used the oxygen from the blood. Now the blood is free from oxygen. That is deoxygenated blood. Where is that? That is in other body parts, hands, legs and other parts. So where the oxygen is used up, the deoxygenated blood, it enters into this right atria. Here two pipes are there. One is vena cava upper. That means from head and other parts of the body which are higher than the heart. From the upper parts, the deoxygenated blood is collected by the vena cava upper. And from lower parts of the body, vena cava lower collects the deoxygenated blood into the right auricle. Now, the right auricle, it contracts and sends the deoxygenated blood to right ventricle. When the ventricles contract, the blood from this right ventricle, it is pumped to the lungs. For what? What is the function of lungs? Adding oxygen. So that is the reason why the deoxygenated blood is pumped to the lungs. So this happens simultaneously in both these auricles and ventricles. See, when the auricles, they relax, they dilate, they becomes bigger, blood from the lungs enters into this left auricle, blood from the body parts enter into the right auricle or right atria. So left atria receives the blood from lungs, that is oxygenated blood. Right atria receives the blood from body parts, that is deoxygenated blood. When the atria contract, here the deoxygenated blood goes to the right ventricle. In left auricle, the oxygenated blood goes to the left ventricle. So the left ventricle is having oxygenated blood, right ventricle is having deoxygenated blood. When these ventricles contract, the deoxygenated blood is pumped to the lungs, the oxygenated blood is pumped to body parts. So in this way, the blood is exchanged between lungs and heart and body parts and heart. So the cycle, two cycles involved in one circulation of the heart. So we call it as double circuit circulation in human bodies. So the blood is not mixed. The mixing of the blood is prevented by the septum and valves. The oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood are not mixed. Without mixing, the circulation takes place here. So that is what happens in this, the construction and various parts of the heart, the pumping mechanism of the heart. Now let us see just a comparison between the other animals and human beings in the construction of heart. In case of human beings, we see the heart is 4-chambered. That means there are 4 rooms in the heart of humans, and as well as birds also we see the same. Here the main reason is that these organisms, human beings, or of course you say mammals. Mammals include the dogs, cats, tiger, lion, elephant, all mammals. Or in the human beings, they have 4-chambered heart because they need to maintain some temperature in their bodies. So that is the reason. That means they cannot depend on the environmental temperature. They need to maintain constant temperature in their bodies. So we call them as warm-blooded animals. In these warm-blooded animals, we see the characteristic of 4-chambered heart. They can manage the temperature. So that is happens by preventing the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Here they have 4 chambers. The chambers of the heart are separated by septum and valve, so by that they can prevent the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Whereas you see the case of fishes and amphibians, they have somewhat, they can tolerate the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. So in their bodies, amphibians, they have 3-chambered heart, fishes, they have 2-chambered heart. So in this 2-chambered heart, they are cold-blooded. So their body temperature is equivalent to the temperature of the environment. They need not maintain a constant body temperature, fishes. So cold-blooded animals. So in their bodies, the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood takes place. Their heart has got only 2 chambers. So in their bodies, the blood it circulates only once, single circuit circulation. You call this circulation as single circuit. But whereas in case of mammals or humans, you call it as double circuit. Because there are 2 cycles running here, one between the lungs and heart. The second one is between the heart and body parts. So where you see that oxygenated blood is going in one circle, deoxygenated blood is going in one circle. So that is what happens there with 2 circles, 2 circuits, you call it as double circuit circulation in mammals and birds, whereas in fishes, they have only 2-chambered heart, you call it as single circuit circulation. So see the other part of our transport system, blood vessels. We discussed about blood, we discussed about heart. The third part is blood vessels. So heart, blood and blood vessels, all these 3, they constitute the transport system. Blood vessels are nothing but the network of tubes that are connected from heart to various parts of our body. So the blood vessels, they have to carry out 2 major functions. One is supply and second one is collection. What they have to supply, what they have to collect. The blood vessels, they have to supply the oxygenated blood to each and every part, and they have to collect the deoxygenated blood from waste, each and every part to the heart back. So this way, the supply and collection takes place. 2 different tasks are to be achieved. So to execute 2 different tasks, 2 different kind of blood vessels are found. One is arteries. The second one is veins. What does these arteries do? They supply. What do they supply? Oxygenated blood to different parts of the body. So they are connected to the heart. Whenever the heart pumps, with a great pressure, then whenever the heart pumps with a great pressure, the blood is pumped or pushed into the blood vessels called arteries. So the arteries, they must have thick walls. Why thick walls? Because pressure is more in the arteries. Because the arteries are connected to the heart pumps with the pressure to supply the blood to different parts. So the arteries must be thick walled because they have to counter the pressure exerted by the heart, and they are very elastic. Otherwise they will burst. If they are not elastic, they will burst. That is the reason why people who consume tobacco, smoking and drinking alcohol, their arteries become stiff. So they have more chance of getting a heart stroke. They have more chance of getting a blood pressure or damage to the blood vessels. So our blood vessels must be elastic. That means we should not consume the foods that harm the blood vessels. We should not consume that, we should not follow the habits that harm the blood vessels, and we should not consume excess amount of fats that harm the blood vessels. So which blood vessel? Arteries. Artery walls, they are thick as well as they are elastic. So this thick walled elastic arteries, what do they carry? They carry the oxygenated blood to each and every part. Now from each and every part, the deoxygenated blood is collected. Collection. So the collection of carbon dioxide blood or deoxygenated blood from various body parts, that is done by veins. These veins are not thick walled because the pressure is almost less in the veins. The pressure is more in the arteries because the blood from the starting point, from the heart, it is pumped with pressure. So with the pressure, the blood is supplied to cells, and from the cells coming back, the pressure is totally down. So here there is no pressure. So veins are thin walled. But here we can notice one more point. The veins, they have valves. So these valves, they make the blood to flow only in one direction, not in reverse direction. See, from your feet, the blood has to come to heart, the deoxygenated blood. Means it has to travel in the direction against to the earth's gravity. So the blood may fall down. It doesn't happen because of the valves. So these valves, they prevent the reverse flow of blood. They make the blood to flow only one direction. So that is happens with the help of valves present in the veins. See, if you see your wrist and if you tighten your hand, you can see some purple color or green color lines. Those are the veins. Veins are located on the upper layers of our body parts. In the hands and also the upper areas, you can see the veins. And at this point, the vein, they used to collect your blood for doing a blood test. And here they use the veins to inject some saline or some glucose water, any other liquids. Here they will inject. So those are the veins. They are thin walled. Arteries, thick walled. They are located deep in your muscles. They are located deep, and they have high pressure which is to be counteracted. So that is the arteries and veins. The point at which the arteries and veins join. For example, this is the artery bringing the oxygenated blood, and they are divided into very thin branches, fine tubes called as capillaries. Capillaries. So these capillaries are the very thin blood vessels which join the arteries and veins. So these are the other kind of blood vessels. So we have arteries, veins and capillaries. So I told you that there is some pressure in the blood vessels. When the heart is pumping, when the heart contracts and relaxes, there is some pressure in the blood vessels. We call it as a blood pressure. Generally we call it as a BP. So normally there is some value to this blood pressure, that is 120 by 80. 120 by 80. So this is 120 is systolic pressure. Systolic is 120 and diastolic pressure is 80. This is the normal value, but when this value crosses this 120, it goes to 160, 180, you call it as hypertension, high BP. Why it happens? The pressure inside the blood vessels is increased because of many reasons. One thing is the stiffness of the arteries. Sometimes the arteries become stiff. I told you when they become stiff. In certain conditions like accumulation of fat in the arteries. If you are consuming more fatty foods like cholesterol rich foods and without doing any physical exercise, then these fats get accumulated in your arteries. They may lead to stiffness of your arteries. Consumption of tobacco, smoking, drinking alcohol, these kind of habits, bad lifestyle also may lead to stiffening of arteries. So by that the blood pressure increases, you call it as hypertension. Excess consumption of sodium also a reason for hypertension. Sodium in the sense salt. Sometimes we use salt and the salt in different forms, MSG and these kind of salts, monosodium glutamates. These kind of excess consumption of sodium is also harmful for this or it may lead to hyper blood pressure. We call it as high BP. So the BP is measured by an instrument called as sphygmomanometer. If you visit a doctor for a general checkup, he ties some kind of band to your hand and he pumps some air. So he exerts some pressure and he checks the pressure using an instrument called as sphygmomanometer, in which he knows the blood pressure in your blood vessels. Generally the people, those who cross 30 to 40 years of age, they'll be regularly checked up for this high blood pressure. So when we are discussing about the different parts of the transport system, we discussed it there. The transport system, it consists of blood vessels and heart. So these are the three major parts of transport system. Among this, the blood, it consists of plasma and it consists of cells, and among these cells we discussed about WBC and RBC. We discussed about the different things which involve in the functioning, its major role, supply of materials, collection of materials, that is distribution, circulation of materials. But sometimes there is one part of these cells which take part in the maintenance of the transport system, repair of the transport system. The blood, it consists of cells RBC, WBC and RBC. Along with that, the blood also contain platelets. What are these platelets? So these platelets, they help in clotting of the blood vessels, clotting of the blood if there is any damage to the blood vessels. So if there is any damage to the blood vessels, and why the blood vessels are damaged? Maybe because of accident. What is that accident? Accidentally some knife while cutting vegetables or while cutting fruits accidentally. So you may have some cut. So you cut your finger while cutting fruits or vegetables. So then what happens? You see that blood coming out, bleeding takes place. So you have cut your finger, in the sense your blood vessels are cut, they are damaged. What happens? Then the blood flows out from your circulatory system. If it happens continuously, if you lose all the blood present in your body, then what happens? The person will die. But it doesn't happen. The bleeding, it stops automatically after some time. That means the blood has got some repair mechanism by which it stops the bleeding naturally. Of course, sometimes you put your effort, you put your finger, you put some cloth, you put something there, you tie it hard, you put some cold water or ice to stop bleeding. You put your efforts to reduce the bleeding, but naturally, internally you have some mechanism in your blood itself which will prevent the excess bleeding, that is the platelets. So when there is a damage to the blood vessel, if the blood vessel is damaged here, the blood, it flows out. So in the blood vessel, the platelets, they gather together, and these platelets, they block the blood vessel and they initiate a series of reactions. They will convert some material, some enzymes into some proteins. So these proteins, they join together to form some fibers, and these fibers along with the platelets, they form the clot. So clotting is a physical as well as a chemical reaction which will stop the bleeding. They will block the damage happened to the blood vessel. They will control the flow of the blood. So platelets, they help in the repair mechanism of the blood vessels. So let us talk about another important fluid that also takes part in the transportation of materials in our body, that is lymph. Lymph is also a fluid like blood, But lymph is not having any pigments. It is a white color fluid, white in color. So how this lymph is formed? The blood from the capillaries. The capillaries, you know, capillaries are the fine blood vessels that connect the arteries and veins. They are located in that places where the arteries are connected to the veins. So this is, just think this is an artery, this is a vein. So the blood is supplied. So it passes through these capillaries. These fine tubes are capillaries. The capillaries are connected to the cells. So what happens from these capillaries, some fluid, some plasma, it escapes out into the intracellular spaces, the gaps between the cells. Into that spaces, some fluid is escaped from the blood. What is that fluid? Plasma. It contains some proteins. So this liquid, it forms a lymph. So this lymph, slowly it passes into the lymphatic vessels and it moves in the lymphatic vessels, and finally it drains into the veins. Again the lymph is poured into the veins. The lymph from the digestive system, it carries the fats that are digested and absorbed in the intestine. They are carried by the lymph. They are collected by the lymph. So the lymph also contains certain cells which take part in providing immunity. So this lymph is also an important fluid in our body, but it is not circulated as like blood, because blood is circulated by heart, pumped by heart, but lymph is not like that. The lymph, it carries fat, and the lymph, it carries the proteins from the intracellular spaces. It enters into the lymph vessels, lymphatic vessels, and again it is drained into the veins. So here the movement of this lymphatic fluid is totally dependent on our body movements. That is the reason why people are asked to do exercise. You may think that why exercise? Why I should give movement to my body? Because our heart is there, it is pumping. But if you put all the load on your heart itself, so the various liquids like lymph and all, how do they move? They don't have any backup support like heart. They have to move on their own. That depends upon the body movements. Even when the blood is flowing in your legs at certain points, it is totally based upon the movements of your body. So you need to give movement to your body at least in some or other way. You call it as exercise, or you call it as yoga, or you call it as whatsoever, fitness, gym. You have to give some movements to your body. So by that, these materials are transported properly. It creates some kind of movements in these vessels, whatever we have, and the movements are properly circulated or transported. So the body is cleansed up. So we discussed about the transport system in animals, that is in human beings, blood vessels, heart. It's a complicated system, complex system, well developed system, because the requirement of animals is very different compared to plants. Animals, they require very good transport system because they go in search of their food, and their eating habits are different, and their energy requirements are entirely different. But whereas a plant, its energy requirements are very less, because plant itself has got the own energy harvesting mechanism, that is photosynthesis. Now let us see, but even then the plants also need a kind of transport system. Let us see how they are able to transport the materials in their bodies. If you see the body design of a plant, the plant is basically having two major parts, shoot and root. The root is under the soil, and the shoot is above the ground, where you can see it grow the various parts, leaves like this. So from where does this plant get the materials? In plants, many of the materials like either gases, carbon dioxide or water, they can be simply absorbed by diffusion. Diffusion is a mechanism by which they can simply absorb the materials. But it is limited. Sometimes diffusion may not be possible from this point to this point, because certain trees, they grow very tall, meters of height, more than 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, 50 feet. So that much height. So here it may not be possible by simple methods like diffusion or osmosis. The materials cannot be transported. Actually, what are the basic materials that are transported here in plants? You see, Water is the major one. Along with water, minerals. Because for the growth of plant, water is needed as well as minerals like sodium, potassium, phosphorus. Along with that, so many other, zinc is required, magnesium is required. So in this way, so many minerals are required by the plant, and these minerals are absorbed along with the water, and the water it need to be transported to very long distances in the plant, because here this is the site of photosynthesis in the leaf. Water is required there, water is available in the ground. So from here the water has to be transported there. But as I told you, the growth pattern or the energy production is less compared with the animals. Energy requirements are less in plants compared to animals. So here the process is slow, the transportation is also slow. They have some tissues to transport the water, but they don't have any pumping organs like heart in animals. Plants do not have any pumping organ. And this is the one way, that is water from roots to the tip of the plant, to different parts of the plant. In this direction transport is required, and food is prepared in these parts. Sometimes the food has to be stored here. In case of carrots or other plants, food is stored in the roots. Sometimes the food is stored in the stem. Sometimes the food is stored in fruit. So if the food is produced in the leaf, it has to be stored in the fruit. So it should be transported to this fruit. So here the transport is required. The prepared food materials are to be transported. So the transport of water and minerals is done by a special tissue called as xylem, and transport of food, other materials, is done by phloem. These are the two different tissues which form the vascular tissue. We call it as a vascular tissue. The plant stem has got, stem and root, they have got a vascular bundle at the middle. The vascular bundle is comprised of the two tissues, xylem and phloem. The construction of the xylem and phloem, the various parts of the xylem and phloem are studied in your 9th class plant and animal tissues. So in this lesson you learnt about this xylem and phloem, what are the components and how do they work. So here the plants, they have the transport system, that is the vascular system, which consists of xylem and phloem that help in the transportation of water and food materials. So in plants we discussed that there are some tissues called as xylem and phloem that help for the transportation. But what are the driving forces? So xylem is responsible for the transportation of water, phloem is responsible for the transportation of food. So here the transportation of water, transportation of food, what are the driving forces, what makes them flow, move in these tissues? So here the transportation of water, the transpiration is the major process which makes the water to flow up in upward direction, that is from the roots to the tip of the leaves. So what is this transpiration? The leaves of the plants or trees, they have pores through which the water is evaporated continuously, that is by the transpiration. The plant, it loses water in the form of water vapor. So when the stomata are open, the water vapor, it goes out. So the water is absorbed here, the water vapor is evaporated here. So as the water vapor is evaporated in the leaves will pull the water from the bottom. So this transpiration, it creates a suction effect. Suction effect, that means a pull of water from the roots. So by that the water is traveled in the xylem in this way. So this is a kind of physical force, and there are some kind of other forces also. The binding force between the water molecules, the coercive forces and other forces also, they drive the water to travel up. But here the transport of water is only one direction, unidirection. So this is achieved by simple physical forces. The second task is transportation of food is not achieved by the simple physical process. The second part, the transport of food, is called as translocation. The food, it has to be transported from one part to another part, not always in one direction, sometimes to the top parts, sometimes to the bottom parts. When the leaves are preparing the food, once the food is prepared, the prepared food is, sometimes it is transported in the root, stored in the root. So the food has to be transported to the root, downward translocation. Sometimes when the plant is blooming, the food is required in the bud part. So from the root, the food, it should be transported to the bud, upward direction. So sometimes food is transported downward, upward, you call it as translocation. So this cannot be done by the simple physical forces like this transport of water. There the energy has to be spent for transportation. The energy in the form of ATP is spent for the translocation. So how this ATP helps? So in the part of the plant where it wants to create the pressure, so into that particular area sucrose is pumped into that particular area. So sucrose is pumped by ATP. Once the sucrose is injected into the particular cells, then what happens? It creates more pressure compared to other cells. So here the energy in the form of ATP is useful for the translocation. Let us see how. So when the materials are to be transported, substances like sucrose are sent into the phloem tissue, that is by the energy molecules ATP are utilized here, and this sucrose is mobilized into that phloem tissue. So this creates the pressure, osmotic pressure. So this osmotic pressure makes the food materials to move in the tissues. So this creates, so for this creation of osmotic pressure, energy is spent in the form of ATP. So that is what observed in the transportation of food, that is the translocation, which is done by the energy usage process. So this is the process which is not as simple as this one, like transportation of water. It is involved only the physical forces, but here the energy is spent in the form of ATP to drive the food materials from one location to another location, which we call it as a translocation. In this way, the food and water are transported in plants. So now let us see the excretion, the another important life process. So excretion helps in the elimination of waste materials, that is in the either animals or plants. Let us see in case of human beings first. And we have seen that in our bodies, the energy is required to carry out various activities, maintenance, and for our growth and survival. So for this energy, materials are supplied from outside of our body, that is the food material and oxygen are supplied, and both these materials are reacted, oxidized in the cells in respiration. So energy is released. Food and oxygen reacts and energy is released. Along with the energy, what is released? Waste is released. Waste is produced in the form of carbon dioxide plus urea and other materials. But this waste, it cannot stay back in the body for a long time. It is not it is a harmful material. If these materials, they stay in our blood for a long duration, they may affect our health and systems. So these materials are to be sent out of the body. So how it is done? So the elimination of waste materials out of our body is called as excretion. Here also the transport system takes part. The transport system takes these materials from the source of production, that means from the cells, from where they are produced. The blood collects these materials and supply to that respective systems which will clear it off. What are the systems? CO2 is taken to lungs, because in the lungs carbon dioxide is expelled out. Then how about the urea? Urea, if it remains back in our blood, it is dangerous condition. It is a toxic material, it toxicates various body parts. So this urea has to be eliminated, and the removal of urea is done by the excretory system of our body. Excretory system. What is this excretory system? We have a pair of kidneys for the excretion of wastes like urea. So where are these pair of kidneys located? They are located in our abdominal cavity. So that is towards the back side. You can feel that they are below your rib cage. At your back side you have a pair of kidneys. So what do these kidneys do? They are red color bean shaped organs present in your abdominal cavity, and they have organs called as kidneys and urinary bladder, ureter and urethra. So kidneys are the major organs of excretion. Let us see how the excretion, how the filtration takes place. So the blood, the deoxygenated, the blood which is supplied to the body parts from the heart, so the blood is supplied to the kidneys even. And the kidneys, they have got highly coiled blood capillaries. So in these blood capillaries, they have, the kidneys, they have structural and functional units called as nephrons. So these nephrons are associated with blood vessels. Nephrons are the tiny filters. The blood is pumped into the kidney through these highly coiled capillaries. So these capillaries are connected to what? Nephrons. Nephrons are the thread-like structures present in the kidney. So these nephrons, they will absorb the toxic materials from the capillaries. They will absorb the toxic material like urea, uric acid, other salts. And these nephrons, they collect all these waste and they concentrate the waste. That means they remove the excess water and they concentrate it. And this concentrated waste in the form of urine, it is passed through the ureter and reaches the urinary bladder. So what is the function of this nephron? What is nephron? Nephron is a unit of kidney. What is the function of the nephron? To filter the blood. What does it filter? It removes the urea. Along with the urea, some water is absorbed, some salts are absorbed. But reabsorption takes place. So whatever the salt is absorbed, whatever the water is absorbed, and whatever the waste is absorbed, the waste is kept back, the water is reabsorbed. So the urine is concentrated. Otherwise, we would go for a toilet for a number of times and we may excrete large volumes of urine. We lose water from our body. It doesn't happen. Whatever the water is absorbed by the kidneys, the water is reabsorbed. Only the waste with little amount of water, it is concentrated to concentrated urine. So the concentrated urine is passed through the ureter and reaches the urinary bladder. So once the urinary bladder is full, we get the sensation of going to a toilet and then we excrete the urine out. In this way, the waste is excreted out in case of human beings. So this is achieved by a pair of organs called as kidneys. So kidneys, they filter the blood to remove the toxic materials, nitrogenous waste like urea, uric acid and other salts. Carbon dioxide is excreted by lungs. Now let us see the excretion in plants. So plants do not have any well-developed excretory system and they don't produce the amount of toxins as we compare to other animals and all. So here, but even then they have some kind of waste materials. We know how the gases are managed in their bodies, plants. Oxygen and carbon dioxide, they can easily exchange with the air with the help of stomata. So they have no problem in exchanging the gases. They can release it out, the carbon dioxide, or they can take the carbon dioxide, they can take the oxygen, or they can produce the oxygen. So that is managed in such a way. But what about the other wastes, metabolic waste? The reactions takes place in their cells and many materials are produced. These materials are stored in the vacuoles of this cell. Sometimes they are stored in the leaves. Wastes are stored in the leaves and seasonally or occasionally the leaves fall. Sometimes these leaves, after completing their life, the leaves become yellow and dry, they fall down. So along with that leaf, the waste is sent out of the body. Sometimes some wastes are stored in the resins and gums. Certain plants, they secrete resins and gums, which consist of waste materials. Of course, they have some commercial value for these resins and gums. We find it they are useful for us, but they are the waste materials for the plant. So it throw out the waste in the form of resins and gums. Certain plants, they store their waste materials in the form of crystals called as raphides. And recently it is found that some plants, they excrete the waste materials from their roots into the soil also. So in this way they have certain various mechanism of getting rid of waste materials, but they don't have a system like kidneys and excretory system what we have seen in case of animals. So this is how the various life processes in plants as well as in animals, how they are controlled. So the major purpose of this life processes we studied. Once again, we just recall it. The main purpose is that survival of the organism, maintenance and repair of the organism, growth and development of the organism. You say something is a living thing, it must have these life processes. Otherwise it is not living. A living thing must have some movements in its internal body parts. Of course, certain animals, they have external movements. Even though they don't have external movements, they have some kind of movements in their cells. Molecules flow. The molecules from outside in the form of air or oxygen, in the form of food or any other materials enter the body. So many reactions takes place. Waste is excreted. Useful materials are utilized. The organism grow, reproduce and perpetuate its race. And every time the organism's, the status, the life is maintained. The body parts, when they are damaged, they are repaired. So everything is carried out by these life processes which we have discussed here. So those are the nutrition, respiration, transportation and excretion.